What's up, gang? So I've got a special video for you today that I'm super excited about. This is going to be one of many. I got a special guest with me today, which is rare and unusual for me. His name is John Mulry. You may have seen him before. He's been around in our world creating amazing marketing campaigns for years. He's a wizard marketer, one of the sharpest direct response marketers really that I've had the opportunity to work with. And I don't say that lightly by any stretch. But the thing is, and the reason why I've asked John to join me every week is because what most folks don't know is that John has been really my secret weapon in terms of media buying and online advertising. John is not only the guy that runs all of our online advertising, but John is the guy that I send all of our top tier clients, all of our top one members to when they want wildly effective online advertising. And the beauty is, and really, I'm going to pick John's brain. Every week, we're going to be diving deep into a different area of online advertising, media buying. John's promised that nothing is going to be held back. And so this is going to be a learning experience for me as I understand the magic behind what John does to run so much profitable traffic for us and others. And so that's ultimately where we are going to go. We're going to be talking about online advertising, media buying, nothing held back, going the distance with that. And so that's why I've asked John to join me. What I was going to say was that John, I think, and John, let me first just say hello. What's up, buddy?
Yeah, super excited to share all this good stuff.
Yeah, very cool, man. I know, I really just I've let you do your thing for so long. Now I get to really look under the hood and really understand what you're doing and how you're doing it and why it's working and all that jazz. But I think I want to share this, and John, you tell me if you think that this is off the mark or this is accurate. I think what makes John so unique when it comes to online advertising is that John's foundation is really in direct response marketing, is in copy, is in offer creation, is really in messaging, in hooks and angles and big ideas and unique mechanisms. And so John's kind of, cut his teeth, so to speak, in direct response long before he moved into the online media buying world. And so what makes John so different from my perspective is that John brings both the media buying skill set and the understanding of the tactical aspects of effective media buying, the algorithm, how to use the different platforms and all of that. But John also brings to the table the direct response elements that make the whole thing work. And so while most maybe media buyers are really experts on the media buying platforms, John is really first and foremost an expert at direct response marketing. And then he's carried that over to the media buying world. And so when John looks at and sets up and designs our campaigns and the campaigns for our clients and campaigns for other clients, he is looking at it through this dual lens of, is the copy right? Is the angle right? Is the hook right? Is the messaging right? Is there congruence between the ad and the landing page? Is the messaging being presented correctly? And then are all of the key elements of media buying and the platforms and leveraging the algorithm and all of that and the pixel and all that jazz set up properly? And so, John, is that a fair kind of assessment of what makes you unique?
Yeah, I think that's pretty accurate. I mean, like it was initially when everything I was doing was all from a direct response point of view, and the media buying elements were coming second. And then it's like having that foundation as a first place. It just made the media buying transition that much easier and that much more effective because when things, yeah, as you know, not all campaigns are home runs from the beginnings, but when it comes to running a media campaign, there's going to be elements that work and there's going to be elements that doesn't work. And just looking at it from the point of view of, oh yeah, the ads aren't working, so this mustn't be this mustn't be a good campaign. Like that's obviously just looking at one side of the coin. And I've been fortunate to be able to look at both sides of the coins now because as you always say, is like anytime we're looking at a campaign or why the campaign may not be giving us the result that we want, we have to first diagnose and find out, is it on the marketing side or is it on the advertising side? And unfortunately, there are um, instances where other people may not have the experience to look at the elements of the marketing side where I can, and being able to balance those two things and being able to have those two things in my arsenal has definitely helped us a lot.
Yeah, for sure, man, for sure. So, and I want to comment on that real quick, but I want to kind of give everybody kind of the lay of the land, so to speak, of where we're going to go today. Today, what I really want to talk about, John, is I really just want to talk about what's really changed over, call it, the last year or 18 months with online advertising, with media buying. And I don't want to keep this kind of vague. I want everybody to really understand what's changed and the implications for them and their business when it comes to online advertising and media buying. First, though, I want to go back and comment, like I said, on what it is that you said. So, right, there are really three kind of core elements, and you can chime in after and correct me if I misspeak here. But there are really three core elements that you need to understand when you are using online advertising, media buying to, for customer acquisition or client acquisition. The first, of course, is the media buying side of the equation. That is the platform, the pixel, the algorithm, kind of the setup of the campaign. And we could also include, under media, we could include the creative. And so the actual ad copy, as well as, the image or the video and what gets said at the beginning of the video, all that kind of stuff. So, right, we've got, of course, with media buying, we've got the media side, right? But that's only one of three. Then, like you said, there is the marketing element, and the marketing element carries over. It goes above and beyond just the creative, the ad copy and the image or the video and so on, and it carries over to the marketing on whatever landing page you're sending them to. And there are elements in terms of congruence, in terms of copy, positioning, presentation, messaging, the format of the landing page, all of that also plays a significant role. So you've got media, you've got marketing, and then, of course, the thing that is probably least understood by most entrepreneurs and marketers is the economics. And so sometimes, right, sometimes, and this is an important discussion for a different day that we'll have, but sometimes you can nail kind of the media elements, and you could nail the marketing elements. But if the economics are off due to pricing, due to, let's say, pricing and or inadequate average order value, right? Merely improving or changing things on the media side, or merely improving or changing things on the marketing side, may still absolutely not produce the right result, because the economics, the cost of the media compared to the price and or average order value, is just off the mark. So is it fair to say, John, that you are really kind of perfecting campaigns or optimizing campaigns, dialing these campaigns in by using those three legs?
Yeah, and typically these days it's we start with because we know the media buying and the marketing side, and we know like there are obviously two parts of the three parts that you mentioned, but we typically start with the economics and see, like, before we look at a campaign, does obviously you can never tell how a campaign is going to produce until you actually run it and get some data and everything else. But beforehand, we're looking at, like, does this campaign sound economically viable? Like, is it like they're looking to sell a $7 ebook in a space where you're paying $10 per click? Like those kind of things, we have to take those into account, and we start with economics first, and then we bring in the other two elements after that.
Yeah, so let's just talk about that for 1 second. I wasn't expecting to go deep here, but I think that it's so important, especially being that you start with the economics of the campaign. And so what's the first thing that you look at when it comes to the economics? Like, how are you, what's the process that you go through for really confirming that economically this campaign has a good likelihood of being viable, or economically there's no way that this thing is going to be viable? What's the process? Where do you begin that?
the first thing we normally look at is the client's expectations of what the results that they're going to get from the campaign and what we believe we can produce from the campaign. So typically we start with like, okay, what's their level of acquisition aggression as you talk about? So are they looking to profit on the front end from this campaign? Are they looking to break even, or do they have the economics, and do they have the back end, a strong enough back end where they're willing to go negative to acquire a customer on the front end? So typically we normally operate around that level too, where we're using front end campaigns to break even, so we can further monetize them then with different offers in the back end. And if we may run some initial tests to see, well, does it look like we're going to be coming close to this break even level? And if it's like we'd have a bank of knowledge, having run lots of different campaigns and spent multiple millions in ad spend for different campaigns for different offers, where we kind of have like a baseline knowledge where we know that, okay, in certain spaces we're going to have to be spending on average a certain amount cost per click, and we can work off averages of, say, okay, this offer, if this converts at this percentage, we're going to be looking at this type of a CPA and this type of an AOV. So then we can determine, okay, well, does this campaign sound like it's economically viable? Now, we'll never know until we actually run the campaign. That's why we always use real data. But we use that as a starting point to at least determine, well, are we starting off at an advantage, or are we starting off knowing that we could be in heavy optimization mode here, or are we in the case of, well, no matter what we do, we'll never be able to make this campaign viable?
Right. Okay. So awesome. So there's so much to unpack there. So again, even though I didn't plan on really going deep here, I think that this is such an important topic, and maybe we'll stay here for the remainder of our time today, and then on next week's call we'll go back and talk about all the changes and whatnot in online advertising. But so, number one, let's lay this out, right? That great marketing and great media buying in terms of targeting, using the platform the right way, will never overcome or fix bad economics. And so you gave this example of, right, if you're paying $10 a visitor and you're selling a $7, a digital book, and you've got no transaction maximization offers, no bump, no upsell, no downsell, nothing like that. Well, right, we know economically that nothing we do on the marketing side or the media side is going to fix that. In other words, the numbers just don't play out, right? You would have to have an astronomically high conversion rate and take rate. It would have to be through the roof. And even then, there are times when like it just wouldn't work. It just doesn't make any sense, right? Like, again, if you're paying $10 a visitor and you're selling a $7 anything, right, even at 100% conversion rate, you're still losing money because, right, every time you spend 10, you make back 7. You can't make that work economically. And so the very first thing, right, is to confirm that what you've got is economically viable. Now, you, John, because of the experience that you have running so much, investing so much in media buying, kind of the average cost, per visitor, per click, in many markets, if not most markets. And so you can tell up front whether something is economically, viable or not. It's important to understand. It's important. The one thing that I just want to add to that for folks, and this is really when it comes to using media buying, or even if you're not using media buying, that is that when you're making projections for a campaign, you don't want to use sky high conversion rates for those projections, for those estimations. So if you're looking at a campaign, if you're launching a new campaign, and you say something along the lines of, well, this campaign will work as long as we get a 50% opt-in rate, a 10% sales conversion rate, a 90% order form completion rate. Like if you start using those numbers that are, sky high or elite level conversion, marketing performance metrics, you're setting yourself up for failure and or for frustration and struggle. And so whenever we launch a new campaign, we always use subpar numbers, subpar marketing performance numbers. Like if this thing only converts at 1%, like if we get a 25% opt-in rate, let's say if we're using two-step, if we get a 1% sales conversion rate, right? If we get a 60% order form completion rate, like we're using subpar numbers. And if when using subpar numbers, the projections still play out where we're right there, we're right within economic viability, okay, then we feel comfortable going forward. But you don't want to set yourself up for struggle and failure by overshooting the likelihood of how your marketing is going to perform. And so, John, is there anything that you would add to that?
Yeah, the only thing I would add really is that there's like a saying that paper never refused ink. And when we're doing forecasting, we can put in any numbers we want and we can get any result we want. But the reality is to really truly find out. And especially if you don't have the experience, let's say, that we have in running the campaigns, is to you need to run some data and you need to actually get real data on the campaign to see if there's viability. That may be sending, if you're sending to, say, let's say you're sending to a webinar campaign and you're looking to generate leads for either an evergreen webinar or a live webinar, that may be sending like at a minimum, like how much is it costing you to get 100 leads, or how much is it if you want to just go on clicks, how much is it costing you to get 100? Probably if you're going clicks to the landing page, you probably these days want to be going, say, to 200 at a minimum, instead of before we used to do like a 100 click minimum viable test. These days you're probably looking at, say, 200. And then, like, okay, how many opt-ins did you get? Or if you're going based off leads, how much is it costing you to get 100 leads? And then what do those 100 leads do in the funnel? Are they watching your webinar? Are they getting to your order form? And start to look at that real data, and then you can put together a much clearer picture than if you were to just put something into a spreadsheet to get the result that you may want or may not want.
Yeah, well said. Well said. So it sounds like, and again, tell me if this is fair to say. So it sounds like the first thing that you do is you look at economic viability. And ultimately, what you're looking for is you're looking for clear indications that something is not economically viable. In other words, you can't confirm economic viability until you run real world traffic and get some real world data. But you certainly can confirm whether something is pretty darn close to not being economically viable. And so you look, you say, right, you use these kind of subpar performance numbers. You say, okay, this is definitely feasible. We're in the zone if on the media side things perform, close to average. Then what you do is, okay, so we've eliminated this being not economically viable. There is a chance at economic viability. And then you go and you run that initial batch of, call it minimum 200 visitors, to get some real world data to understand both what you're paying per visitor and ultimately how the opt-in page, let's say if you're running two-step, the opt-in page is performing or the webinar registration page is performing. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, and like that's exactly what we do. But just to bring it back and just to cement home the fact that when we say economic viability, what we're looking for is that based on what the client's expectation of results. So like if they're fine going $100 negatives, economic viability is going to be a lot different than if the client is expecting a 3x ROAS. So it's all based on like okay, our client is fine spending $100 on a customer that's going to generate $100 on day zero. Then our economic viability is a completely different scenario if they're expecting that to pay $10 for that customer to spend $100 on day zero. So like everything stems back from, okay, what are their expectations? And then sometimes their expectations are completely out of whack, and sometimes we have to bring them back into the real world and
Yeah.
explain the situation to them. And that sometimes goes down well, sometimes it doesn't go down well, but we try to be as real as possible. So
Yeah, no, I love that. So let's just talk about that, for 1 second. So is there kind of you mentioned like, 3x ROAS, and I think that, first of all, what's important to understand for everybody is that, different people calculate ROAS differently. In other words, some people will say we got a 3x ROAS, but what they're ultimately referring to is their front end campaign and their first back end campaign, right? So they might be calculating ROAS over 14 days or 21 days, which include like the front end campaign, and then, an inside sales team that is outbounding people and then converting a certain percentage. And then right at 21 days, they're now calculating ROAS. So when you hear numbers like 3x ROAS or whatever the number, 5x ROAS, whatever, you have to really understand how they're calculating that and what is being included in that to calculate the ROAS. And so, John, is there, is there a piece of advice that you could give people, a general piece of advice about expectations? Like, meaning, is there, can you go as far as to say, like, look, if you're expecting a 3x ROAS from your initial front end campaign and you're in a competitive marketplace, your expectations are off the mark because the likelihood of you experiencing that 3x ROAS from your front end campaign alone on day zero is slim to none. Like, is there some sort of guide that you can give folks for setting the right expectations?
I don't know if there's a guide we can give folks for the right expectations. What I can say is that the reality is today with paid media that it is very difficult in most markets to acquire customers at a profit and acquire them, even in most markets, to acquire them at break even, unless you have an incredible marketing chops, insane marketing copy, are in a space that is has a very, the best way I can say it is like a massive total addressable market where there's a lot of scale in there, and like and there's not a lot of competition. Now there's very few of those spaces out there. So the kind of expectations we like to set is more of on the flip, that if you were acquiring customers at least at break even at best, and you could further monetize those customers in the back end, would you be happy with that? And most often than not, they are, when they realize, okay, yeah, we're paying X amount per month on media spend, and we're acquiring X amount of customers per month, and then we can further monetize those after the fact. And anything we generate after that, then there's no additional cost to that, bar
Yeah.
whatever costs there are in the business. Like generally speaking, that's the expectation that we help people to achieve, because sure, there are unicorns out there where you can be running ads and you can be achieving crazy ROASs, but when you actually dig into the nitty gritty of those results, they're oftentimes not what they seem. So just to give you a perfect example, so we're working with a client at the minute and we're dealing specifically with YouTube for them. They have another agency that's working with them from a Facebook side. And the client that we're working with, they actually sent me a message on, I think it was Thursday or Friday last week, saying if you had spent $1,100 on a campaign and generated a 6x ROAS, and I had to confirm what they meant exactly by the 6x ROAS, which I'll get to in a second. How aggressive would you be with your spend on that campaign? And like it was kind of a loaded question. I kind of knew where he was going with the question because we've had previous discussions before. And my answer was fairly straightforward: is I would push that spend as much as possible, me personally, to with the goal of one thing: maximum customer acquisition up to the point of break even. And then that's where I would take the foot off the gas, because, and the reason why I said that to him specifically is because I know that they're absolute monsters when it comes to monetizing people the second time, third time, fourth time, and fifth time. So my goal would be to acquire as many customers as possible, and at up to break even, maybe even a little bit more to break even, because I know they're so good at the back end. But
Yeah.
the where he was going with the question was that the 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 agency was reluctant to push past any certain amount of spend, because they're so ingrained with this idea that you need to get a certain amount of ROAS, or you need to get a certain amount of profit on the front and everything else, which is fine. And like they were getting great results at those levels. But I said to the client that you'll never be able to spend how much you want to spend every single month operating at that level one of, we need to produce X amount of profit. And they understand that. But the reality is that, like, when you break it down, my goal with paid media is, can we get you customers for free? Essentially, you're paying $10,000 per month on ad spend, or $20,000 per month on ad spend. Can we produce for you in return X amount of customers where you're not out of pocket? and those customers are spending pretty much the whatever you're using to acquire those, whatever you're spending to acquire those customers, that they're at least spending that back with you on day zero.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, look, what you just said is a foundational lesson that took me a long time to really understand. And when folks at like, when I do a podcast interview or something like that, and I'm asked, like, knowing what I know today, what would I do differently? One of the very first things that I always say is what it is that you just explained, which is really understanding that the game is really won in a big way based on how much more you're willing to spend to acquire a buyer and not how much less can you spend to acquire a buyer. In other words, the typical mom and pop entrepreneur, they're almost constantly looking to reduce their marketing budget. They want to spend the least amount that they possibly can to acquire a customer. Whereas the most successful direct response entrepreneurs and companies understand that the game is antithetical to that. In other words, it's the opposite of that. He or she who can spend the most, as Dan Kennedy said, will win the game. The game becomes infinitely easier when you can spend more to acquire a buyer. Not only, like, look, not only does, when you can spend more, the game becomes easier because you can have lower conversion rates and still have viable campaigns. But you can also, right, when it comes to beating competition or kind of, out pulling them, right, like you have a massive advantage. This is why the Agora companies are able to dominate, because they can far outspend what, startups and competitors can spend to acquire a buyer. But you're also, when you're trying to suppress or lower your cost per acquisition, you're going against the grain. You're going against the natural trajectory of media costs. Media costs are only going to increase. We've seen them increase over the last decade, over the last 5 years, over the last 24 months, and they will only continue to increase in competitive and valuable markets, verticals, and niches. And so to fight against that, right, you're going in the opposite direction of the trend of the market. The smarter thing to do is to recognize that if the more you can spend, the easier the game becomes. The more you can spend and still remain at, let's say, break even on day zero, the more buyers you can acquire. And like you said, John, when you're at break even, when you're at that level too, you're acquiring buyers, the single most valuable asset of a business, for free. Your bank account is no less today than it was a week ago or 2 weeks ago, except today you have more of the most valuable asset in your business. You have more customers. Assuming that you've got a back end, a way to produce the second sale, third sale, fourth sale, and so on, you've got a machine, right? And so, like, you ask somebody, like, look, how would it change your business if next month you acquired 10,000 buyers, new buyers in your marketplace, and it cost you zero? Your bank account was no different. Would that radically change your business and the prospect of your business and this quarter in terms of revenue and profits, and the next year in terms of revenue and profits? The answer is an obvious yes. And so this is such a, it's such a critical thing. We haven't even touched on, which we're going to save for future calls, the media side, the marketing side, the messaging side, the creative side. Just talking about the economic leg is so important. Setting the right expectations, having the right expectations, really even understanding what your expectations in terms of ROAS can and will do to the volume of new buyers you get, right? And so are you optimizing for merely for ROAS, or are you optimizing for maximum new customers, right? Because oftentimes, and I first learned this many, many moons ago from the late, great Clayton Makepeace, that if you optimize for ROAS, you can wildly sacrifice the volume of new buyers and hence the back end revenue and profit that you could be getting, right? It's short-sighted because you're looking at that first sale and the profit on that first sale only, and not recognizing the negative impact on the volume of new customers that you're bringing into your ecosystem that you can convert through the back end to greater and greater profit. So there's so many implications here with the economics. But I want to give you the final word on economics, and then I think we'll wrap today because I don't want to overwhelm folks with, and it does feel like we've only just scratched the surface even on this topic. But is there anything today that you would add to this discussion of economics that you think folks really need to understand about using online advertising, media buying today?
Yeah, the thing that really drove it home for me was was something that I learned from Dan Kennedy early on, and it's something that I when I first heard it, it was like intuitively sat with me, and I was like, yeah, that makes sense. But it wasn't until years later, till I was putting it into practice for myself and for clients and everything else, that I really drove home for me. And it's the idea that we don't like what the way we should think about all of this encompassing is that we get a sale to generate a customer. We don't get a customer to generate a sale. The
Mm.
sole reason that we're out there to acquire customers or to acquire sales is so we can get a customer. And we're going to look after that customer and we're going to put more offers in front of them and not be afraid to put more offers in front of them. And when we do that, that customer is going to buy again and again and again. And it's that whole analogy of that, like to sum it up, is like that's my whole ethos of what we do from media buying point of views. We're putting these things in place so we can generate a sale for you so you get that customer. And then with everything else that you're doing in your business, we're going to turn that customer into a repeat buyer, a higher value buyer, and so on and so forth.
I love it, man. So smart, man, right? Like that whole idea of on the front end, it's all about generating a sale to acquire a customer. And right, we want to do that in mass. We want to acquire as many customers as we possibly can. If operating at level 2, that's break even. That means you're acquiring mass customers for free. Your bank account is no less today than it was 2 weeks ago, whatever it may be. Now you have the opportunity to turn those customers into, or clients into, higher value assets for your business, deliver more value, generate more sales, more profit, all of that. And so it's a shift for a lot of entrepreneurs and marketers in terms of the way that they think about advertising. Might most think about it very transactionally, where I want to, like you said, like the Dan Kennedy, right? I'm generating a customer to produce a sale, and I want a certain amount of profit in that sale on the front. It is very short-sighted. It is not the way the pros play the direct response game. And it is the more difficult game to play. And so I love it. And I appreciate you giving me a peek into your mindset with this. So I want to wrap with, so if folks want to learn more about what you do and what you can do for them, like if they want to get in touch with you, if they are interested maybe in having you run their media or just talking to you about ways to improve their media, where do they go?
So the easiest place they can go is to e5agency.com. And on there they'll get a showcase of some of our case studies. They'll find out a little bit more about how we work and how we could potentially help them. And then if it's suitable to them, there'll be a place there where they can schedule a call, and if we think they're suitable, I'll jump on Zoom with them myself personally. We don't have like a sales team or anything like that, and we can walk through if and how we might be able to help them.
Okay, so the letter E, the numeral 5 agency.com,
Agency.com.
E5 agency, agency.com. And so very good, man. So I'm looking forward to next week where we're going to dive deeper. Next week, we will get to the changes in the online advertising, media buying landscape and what the implications of those changes for everybody that they need to be aware of. And then I'm just going to continue every week, man, to pick your brain and share this with everybody. And so I appreciate it, brother. Thank you, man.
Yeah, no problem.